Friday night. It's Oceanside weekend, and you're there, but neither of us are racing
I
Ocean.
know. I know. I'm so excited that I'm not racing. It's so funny, right? Like I this is my second year in a row coming to this race and not racing. So really coaching
Hmm.
and just being part of the environment.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
such a good environment
it
here.
is.
The weather is great. It's beautiful days.
Hmm.
I brought my road bike down. I did 57 miles today
Oh, beautiful.
in the rolling hills. Just man, it's just I honestly I could have ridden longer if I had more fuel. I ran out of fuel.
Yeah. Uh,
But it's a good place to be. Like I'm still like I go to the expo and hanging
yeah.
out. I go to some of the events.
For people.
I did the Hoka run last night, and
Yeah.
that was super fun.
Mm.
So yeah, it's really it's a good place to come and just embrace the sport. I raced a month ago, and I'm going to race again in St. George
Yeah.
at 70.3. So it really was honestly, I thought about it, but it's just too much. I can't, I feel like I can't do three 70.3s in 3 months.
Yeah.
Like,
As we get older, it gets a little tougher to pack
yeah,
those races in week to week. But
yeah,
I always look at Oceanside as almost like our season opener for our region. It's
yeah,
always and either you or I have been racing it for some time. So, and sometimes we're
yeah,
there at the same time, and sometimes it's just you, or just me, whichever way it is. And
yeah.
such a great race, and it's fun to get an ocean swim either in the bay or in the ocean. And the bike course is fantastic and challenging, and the run is it's just neat.
It's fabulous. It's funny you mentioned the ocean swim because I chose to swim at their wonderful aquatic center here. They have
So,
like one of the most beautiful aquatic
I
centers
haven't
I've
been
ever
there.
been to in
Okay.
Oceanside, and it's relatively new.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so like it was interesting. We're like, well, should I bring my wetsuit and swim in 59 degrees or swim at this unbelievable aquatic center? I chose the aquatic center.
Tough call. That's great.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about training distribution today. And we're gonna do a relatively quick podcast, and we're gonna kind of hit some of the bigger points. And I know we've talked about training distribution before, but it seems like it's always evolving and it's always changing. And if we look at the ideas from 10 years ago, it's evolved. From 5 years ago, it's evolved. But there's some tendencies that have kind of stuck.
Hmm.
And what I mean by training distribution is many different things. So you could just talk about training distribution as like the amount you swim, you bike, and you run. In triathlon, where we look at training distribution in a particular sport, it's well, how much low intensity, moderate intensity, or high intensity, and then also factoring all those things around, seasonality or periodization.
Hmm.
So this is a lot bigger than just saying, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. This is multifactorial and once again evolving.
Hmm.
So, John, what do you think is? I mean, maybe we can think about this. Like, what's changed in the last 5 or 10 years that you've seen regarding? Let's start talking about just the amount you should swim, bike, and run, and how do you figure that out?
So yeah, I would say over the course of the sport from the 80s to now, it has changed quite a bit in terms of early on it was very volume heavy. Athletes going out and trying to bike over 300 miles a week, run over 50 miles a week, and swim 20,000 yards a week. That's a huge load of volume and hard to sustain that over a long period of time. And so I think what's happened over the evolution of the sport is you're able to zero in on a more effective training program that does not have to maximize being a swimmer, being a cyclist, and being a runner. You're a triathlete, and you need to train as a triathlete, not as a swimmer, biker, or runner. Yes, we get some advantages by thinking like a swimmer and training with swimmers. We get some advantage with thinking like a cyclist and training with cyclists, and likewise with running. But triathlon's a sport, and we need to treat it as a sport, and we need to train as triathlon is all three sports.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's really interesting. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos on this kind of topic, and some really particular ones that were like geared towards runners or
Mm-hmm.
geared towards a swimmer. And the one that was geared towards swimming, they were actually talking about training distribution for sprinters versus
Yeah.
distance swimmers. And so like I got really keyed in on the distance swimmers and what they were doing, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. These guys are swimming 60 or 70,000 yards or meters a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, holy cow, like that is so much. And then I'm like, okay, so let's look at the runners. And I look at the runners. Okay, well, top level marathoners or half marathoners, it varies, but between 80 and 120 miles per week. Well, we're not doing that either,
Mm-mm.
right? And then cycling, you mentioned it already. It's pretty common for 2 to 300 miles a week for a cyclist,
Yeah.
which all makes sense in those individual sports. But like you said, how do we figure out how much of each one of those do we need as triathletes? And the step I'll take next is to think about, should we train to our strengths or train to our weaknesses?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As far as just purely distribution, like if swimming is your weakest thing, should you do more of that? Or should you just enough to survive? Like, and these are real questions that people have. So how do you wrap your head around that, John?
Well, one, most of us are doing the sport purely for fun. And
Yep.
I really put a lot of value in consistent training. And consistent training is all founded on enjoying. And, if swimming's your strength and you love swimming and you like swimming 5 days a week, swim 5 days a week. If you like running, you enjoy running, and so forth. So tap into the parts of the sport that you enjoy and amplify it. Now, if you want to get better in the sport, you do have to fix those deficiencies. You got to either swim better, bike run better, or run better, or transition better, whatever it is. But you can do that strategically, still having a foundation in the part of the sport that you enjoy. But we're triathletes. We're not swimmers, bikers, or runners. We're trying to enjoy all three at the same time.
I super love that you mentioned this. So there's some of the people that I coach that they don't really like swimming. I gotta be honest with you. Like,
Yeah.
by the way, I'm it's taken me 14 years and I'm converting. I'm kind of liking swimming now. Um, so maybe what we do with them and what I've done with them is say, okay, we're only gonna swim twice a week,
Mm-hmm.
or we're gonna swim, but we're only gonna swim a maximum of 2,000 every
Mm-hmm.
time you go. So it's a shorter duration than maybe more people would do, but they don't enjoy it.
Right.
They enjoy triathlon, they enjoy swim, they enjoy biking, and they enjoy running, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't really enjoy it. They do the swim just to survive it, not to survive it, but like to get through it. So they don't need to be doing a tremendous amount of that. We talked about this many times, like least effective dose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do think that that's important. And it's the same. I see the same thing with running. Some people will see like that's their least favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, what's the least effective dose to make them help them be successful? But I'm not just going to keep shoving running down them if they don't enjoy it. And I think you're right. We need to look at number one, what we enjoy, and
Yeah.
then if the goal once again is to qualify for a world championship, get on the podium of a 70.3, that's a different thing
Mm-hmm.
than just purely enjoying the sport.
Yeah. No, and I think you're spot on with even trying to figure out the frequency of training based upon what they enjoy doing. Because if you keep saying I don't enjoy doing this, whatever it is, and then you force yourself to do it, eventually you're just not going to enjoy it. You're just I don't believe that if you get to the pool or you go out for a run and you're like, man, I really hate running. I don't want to put my running shoes on. And every day you do that, eventually you're going to say, I don't want to run anymore. So I think finding ways to do the sport, even the ones that you don't like, is important. And I see far too often people will say, I don't like this, and then they do crazy workouts in that, whatever it is. Now, I'll use swimming as the example. I don't like swimming. And then they go do 5,000 yards in a single
Yeah,
workout.
yeah,
It's like, you won't enjoy swimming 5,000 yards maybe twice a week. You won't enjoy it. No, swimmers don't enjoy that, because you've got to build up that endurance to be able to do it. But maybe you enjoy 500 yards. I know that sounds so ridiculous to say, well, let me go swim 500 yards, but maybe that's what it is that isn't a barrier to saying I hate it. Maybe it's 1,000 yards, maybe it's 50, whatever it is. But don't take on workouts that you're not going to like, because it feeds the wrong energy into being a triathlete.
I'm so glad we're going down this road, and this wasn't the road I was going to go down,
No.
and which is great, right? Is because I have like these little tools that I use that I've actually tried to help other people with, is
Mhm.
trying to find the things that are enjoyable in that sport.
Yeah.
So what makes it more enjoyable? So one of the things that, when I'm not enjoying swimming, I put fins on,
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I love
right?
it. Hmm.
Or I enjoy a lot more if I put my paddles. I
Yeah.
have really tiny paddles that I use for positioning. I enjoy swimming more with those,
Yeah.
right? And a pull buoy and or whatever the case may be. So that's my little carrot. And I've several of the people I coach, I'm like, you can put fins on anytime you want.
Yep.
You want to put your small paddles on anytime you want. Don't put the big ones
No
on.
rule, no law against it. Hmm.
Right. There's no law against it. And just because there's swim coaches out there that are like, oh, well, that's not true swimming or what, I don't care because you're in the water and you're getting feel for the water. And
Hmm.
if you can find enjoyment
Yeah.
in doing it, that's perfect. On the bike, find somewhere, I tell people this all the time, find somewhere you love to ride
Yeah.
if it's outside.
Hmm.
Right? Like if there's your favorite route where you got like if it's 5 miles that you think it's great pavement,
Yeah.
there's no traffic, go ride there,
Hmm.
right? We've talked about it before. Maybe it's mountain biking. You're doing a triathlon, but you love to go mountain biking.
Totally.
Go mountain bike.
Do it.
If you enjoy that, great. The running one, same thing.
Hmm.
Find somewhere you love to run,
Yeah.
and find that course or that place, and maybe it's a tree lined area or whatever. We've done this before where, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast. I don't like, there's days that I don't really feel like running when it's really windy out.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so what I like to do is on those days when I really need to go for a run, I'm really nice to my wife and I'm like, hey, would you pick me up in 45 minutes over here and
Yeah.
I'll run downwind.
Yeah.
And it's completely enjoyable,
Yeah.
right? So I'm trying to make the triathlon training enjoyable in
Hmm.
all three aspects. And then we can even go into indoor and like what makes you feel good indoors.
Yeah.
You know, do you want to just zone out and watch Netflix while you ride? Okay, well, let's figure out ways we can make that happen.
Hmm.
So those are just some of the ideas that kind of bounce around my brain when I start to think about distributing into areas that people don't necessarily enjoy.
I love those. Those are fantastic tips, and I share a lot of that with you. You know, I put a lot of power in the power of affirmation. And I discovered this when I finished swimming in college. It was Division III, so it was more for fun
Yeah.
than anything. But it was still a lot of swimming, a lot of morning workouts, afternoon workouts, a lot of travel, all this. And I got done with swimming. I was like, I'm sort of done. But then I found triathlon, and I still had to swim. And so I go to the pool, and I just dreaded getting in the water for another workout. And I'm like, well, why am I dreading it? I want to do a triathlon. I need to keep swimming. So I started telling myself, I get to the pool deck, I say, I love swimming, and I jump in and start swimming. And I just kept doing that. I kept doing that. I kept doing it. And eventually my brain did change and said, I love swimming. And now, but I did find the type of workouts I enjoyed doing too, as opposed to doing the workouts that I didn't enjoy doing. And, to do what I enjoy. And I think that's important. And I really like what you said about the fins or whatever gear, you know, that you use. Use it. Right now I'm struggling with my fitness and my ability even to swim. And uh, to make it easier and still enjoyable, I put on buoyancy shorts and I use fins. Not all. I don't use the fins all the time because they're broken right now and I got to get a new pair. But no shame. It's like I still want to be able to swim. If I don't use the buoyancy shorts, I was really struggling for a bit, and I'm like that. That's just no fun. And so it's okay to enjoy the workouts. Oh, one other thing I do not like to say after workout is, oh, that was such a hard workout or such a painful workout. I don't use a lot of negative descriptors, even if it's one of the sports that I'm not really jazzed about. Just again, I feel a lot of strength in that power of affirmation and saying, that was a good workout. That was something I really enjoyed. Maybe it was hard, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I also like the idea of it could be swim, bike, or run. It's a little harder with the run. Actually, it depends where you go, but if you find yourself not enjoying yourself, get out,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? If you're, don't just be like, I hate myself. I'm just gonna suffer through this 5,000 yards. Like if at 3,000 yards, you're like, oh, I'm done. I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm just struggling mentally. Like, get out. It's okay. And I know sometimes people they feel like they're a failure if they set a goal for themselves
Mhm.
and but I think that that's a negative way to look at it. I mean, I've done this many times on a bike ride. It gets really windy or it gets
Yeah,
cold, and I'm like, I'm not enjoying myself anymore. I'm going home.
yeah, right,
And
right.
and I used to early on in my triathlon career, I wouldn't do it. I would just like,
Mhm.
I gotta get my 4 hours in, and it doesn't matter. Well, maybe it's perspective and time where I've recognized that, it's got to be enjoyable. And if
Mhm.
and not every training needs to be enjoyable. Like, don't get me wrong, like
It's
they're
not
hard,
rainbows and butterflies. Yeah.
but if it's more than you expected, and oftentimes it's weather related.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's like injury related, like, oh, I'm riding, my knee's really bothering me. Well, go home,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think that when we think about the once again the bigger picture of training distribution, um, if you don't enjoy it
Yeah.
and
Training
it's not
distribution,
providing joy in your life, yeah,
I was thinking about that, the way our discussion has gone. Training distribution should be 95% you enjoyed it,
yeah,
5%, oh man, just that's tough, but very small percentage of those. But something else you said triggered the idea that sometimes um, the training's interfered by your gear. And how many times both you and I have heard cycling is painful, the saddle's painful. Maybe that my hands get really sore after biking, or I get hot spots in my foot. It should not be painful. Running should not be painful. You should have the right gear so that you can bike without pain, so you can run without pain.
yeah. No, I think it's good, and not everyone can do that. By the way, like it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to find the right gear, but also, I think this goes big picture to train distribution. I also think people ramp up too quickly,
Hmm.
and they haven't trained for 6 months, and next thing you know, they want to do a 3 hour bike ride, and then it's maybe they're not comfortable, like their hands aren't used to it, their arms aren't used to it, their butt's not used to it, and that's not enjoyable anymore.
Hmm.
And they once again they suffer through because they think it's what they should do
Yeah.
and not what ultimately would be in their best interest.
So, talk a little bit about training distribution in the sense of minimizing the risk of injury.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. And I'm going to put it, kind of flip it a little bit and start thinking about like what I see elite runners doing.
Hmm.
And elite runners, more and more of them are cross training.
Hmm.
They're finding something else. They're biking, they're doing an elliptical, some are swimming, not many, some are swimming. They're rowing. They're finding another modality to increase their cardiovascular fitness, but reducing the risk of injury.
Hmm.
And so I think that once in triathlon is kind of set up in a really good way to kind of help with that balance.
Hmm.
Um, but in a bigger picture, things that we do, for example, on the bike, might not be conducive to healthy running. And
So,
it's a lot of like positional stuff, right? So time trialing in particular, where you're in a really deep hip flexion
yeah.
all of the time, causes the hip flexor, so the opposite side of the hip from the butt, to become tight, right? It causes the glutes to become relatively loose.
Hmm.
And when we run, we need to get the exact kind of opposite motion. And so it's an interesting paradigm, right? Like we want to be balanced and we want to like do some extra training, some cross training, but cross training can also contribute to injury
Yeah.
if you're not careful about, some of the I don't know, injury prevention things that we can do with like stretching and strengthening
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. So it's a difficult question, right?
Mhm.
And then ultimately, when we've talked about this many times, as far as like not ramping up too quickly
Mhm.
and being very, very prescriptive with your ramp rate and how many miles at what intensity per week you do.
Mhm.
I know that we've bounced around numbers like 10%, but the truth might be 5%
Yeah.
volume per week. And if you think about it, let's hypothetically say that you're cycle. Let's start with cycling because it's an easy number. You're cycling I don't know. Let's say you're cycling 100 kilometers a week. So
Mhm.
I'll use 60 miles a week.
Okay.
And if I keep going 10% per week, adding, it doesn't take too long and I'm at 300 miles.
Yeah. Right.
And we'd all agree that most of us would break
Mhm.
at 300 miles a week. So it might actually be 10% for a couple weeks, then 9%, then 8%, then 7%, then and it's not once again, it's not just volume either, because there's an intensity piece as well, right?
Mhm.
You can stay at the exact same volume as far as the number of miles, but if you do them harder, there's more load. So it's this is what was those old slide rulers? I think they were called.
Abacus.
Like
No, no,
yeah,
abacus is a beat. Yeah.
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 It was like a slide ruler that went like two different directions.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I can't remember. It was in geometry when I was younger, but anyways, it had two basically moving parts, and the balance of those two moving parts is the hard part.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, I love
Yeah.
it. So you're bringing up intensity and volume. Um, there's always this talk of 80/20. How do you explain 80/20 to the athletes that you work with?
It's so interesting, right? Because my thoughts on it keep evolving. The more I read and the more I learn, and the more experience I have working with athletes, and just myself, the more I believe in this, but also the more I keep tweaking it.
Mm-hmm.
And I still believe the majority of training needs to be low intensity,
Hmm.
keep it easy, and then a certain percent, depending on the athlete, needs to be hard.
Hmm.
And I think we all can understand what the easy is. The hard is the more difficult thing. So there's the approach of, everything needs to be really hard or really easy, with an 80% towards easy, 20% towards hard. But where does the middle fall in? Because
Hmm.
that's where we race at, right? Especially in a long distance triathlon, we're racing in the middle.
Yeah.
And so, I played around a lot with this, and I think that we're in triathlon, we might be better off with more of a 80%. Well, I hate to do this because I think it also depends on the time of year, right?
Hmm.
So we're getting ready. Most of the athletes I'm working with are getting ready. They're either racing this race, the first race of the year, or they are racing St. George for the first race of the year. And I'll also add, it's been a really crazy year because many of the athletes I work with raced into December in New Zealand,
Yeah. Right.
right? And so it wasn't the traditional off period.
Hmm.
But as we get closer to a race, I think the train distribution changes and we move towards more race specific
Hmm.
workouts. And so, but the balance might actually stay the same, right? It's 80/20, where 20% is race pace or just below race pace,
Yeah.
with very little above race pace. Whereas in the true off season, I might do more above race pace as
Hmm.
far as the 20% and still 80% at like that low level. Um, and then also been really thinking a lot about this as far as how do you define low versus high?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
we can look at like lactate curves and all of these things. But there was another podcast I listened to recently that was talking about this, and it really has to do with the nervous system.
Hmm.
So we've talked in the past about autonomic nervous system a lot, sympathetic, parasympathetic. I think everybody kind of knows that, sympathetic is like the fight or flight response, parasympathetic is the rest and digest. And I think we all know when we get sympathetic, right? Blood pressure goes up, our nerves are kind of working, right? And so this podcast was talking about maybe defining the 80/20 rule. 80% needs to be your nervous system is not being taxed.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Like 20% your nervous system is being taxed
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because and the thought process I think of is, let's say it's a 4 hour bike ride
Right.
and you are not fit enough to do a 4 hour bike ride. That last hour, it's going to be taxing to your nervous system.
Yeah, right.
Even if you're at like a low zone cardiovascularly, right? It's the stress response we're trying to potentially mitigate. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Oh no, it totally does. Yeah.
And so maybe what you need to do is, instead of doing, I don't know, that last hour at 130 watts or 140 watts, you're doing it at 100 watts
Yeah.
or 90 watts. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like, well, I'm not doing anything. Well, yeah, you actually still are exercising. And you're avoiding
Mm-hmm.
that piece of the stress. So those are, once again, I know I went on and on around in a circle, but
No, no, that
that's how I think about it.
no, that's really good. And and you and I both have read the research in this area. High intensity training has a lot of benefits for performance. A lot of
Yep.
benefits. The challenge with high intensity training is doing that for a long period of time. And long period of time, it's sort of relative. Months, years, lifelong. And so it's really important. And you talked about doing it in different seasons and approaching it that way. Also across the lifespan. You and I have been involved with the sport
Yeah.
for some time. And what I was doing back in my 20s is different than what I'm doing right now and how I approach it. But you're spot on that in high intensity, there's a huge neural component to it. And
Yep.
training the nervous system in terms of coordination, generating the right force at the right time. That's just as important as training the physiology. And so there is something to be said about making sure that you have some high intensity in, but at the same time, you and I both approach this as a lifelong sport. And so, and going back to what we were talking about before, if you have a hard time looking forward to a high intense workout, then you may be shortening your lifespan in the sport. So
Yeah.
it is
Yep.
a matter of making sure that your workouts are achievable for the fitness that you have in the nervous system and which one you're actually taxing. Because if you just start continuing to add stress to an already stressful lifestyle, that may really be setting you up for disaster.
Well, especially you're, like you said, like, with the stressful lifestyle, and we'll go a little bit deeper, really briefly, but it's not just the nerve, right? It's what happens in the endocrine glands, and
Yep, yep.
particularly cortisol, right? So from the adrenal glands,
Mm-hmm.
and the other way I kind of explain this to people is, okay, so let's say you're tired, you didn't have a good sleep last night, and you're really tired, and you work your whole day. It's stressful. You're kind of having a little bit of extra cortisol, a little less stress hormone. You get home 5, 6 o'clock, and you're like, okay, I got to get on the bike. Oh, I've got a hit session. I have a high intensity session. Well, how do you feel once you finish? You feel awake. You feel stimulated. Well, you didn't become more awake.
Right.
You just had a big release of stress hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And once again, long term, that stimulation is probably not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really, really hard to recognize that, hey, maybe today's not the day I should do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't exercise. I'm saying you shouldn't exercise to the point where you're causing this big release of stress hormone.
Right.
Right. And I think that that's a kind of a self-reflection, because I've done it. You've
Mm-hmm.
done it too,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, like that's a great system to have in place race day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when we're all nervous and we're jumping around and we're
Mm-hmm.
ready to go, like that's a stress hormone. That's great on race day, but I don't think we should be going to that well day after day after day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it wears you down. It's stress is a stress, and
Yeah.
stress is not just mileage, not just yardage. It's not just intensity. It's other things that are happening. It's in how well you're sleeping, how well you're eating, what's happening at work, what's happening with family, what's happening with friends. Stress is stress.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's and the more I read on this, the more I'm believing it even more.
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when we're seeing these stress hormones being elevated all the time, and the research I'm reading is pointing towards like cardiovascular disease, towards
Yeah.
cancer,
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, like all of these things that
Mm-hmm.
are neurometabolic diseases, that we think we're doing all this good by exercising,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe our training distribution is wrong, and it's actually driving disease processes rather than making us healthier.
Something you and I both advocate for is triathlon, and we'll speak triathlon specifically, but sports in general, needs to bring value to your life. And
Yeah.
if it's not bringing value to your life, if it's bringing, pulling you away from your family and friends, or interfering with your work, it's not being purposeful and useful, and ultimately it can manifest itself in degradation of health. It's not just degradation of performance, but your health gets worse.
I could not agree more. All right, well, I think that's a great place to leave it
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
So thanks, John, for jumping on tonight, and yeah, we're gonna have a great time down in Oceanside this weekend, and we got a little travel again next weekend. We're going to St. George for a
Yeah,
little bit of training in St. George. So, man, it's been some crazy times, but it's good times.
I love it, and enjoy cheering people on.
I
We'll be
will.
cheering people on back here, tracking athletes on our app or app to track people, and yeah,
Awesome.
wishing everyone the best day, and enjoy the race experience.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a great weekend, John.
All right, thanks. Talk soon.
Okay, bye.